The only difference is that this shit was real and I was actually expected to know something. I didn't know anything.
Gonzo, the Coast Guard years. Key West, episode 8. What's a Thetis?
What the hell is a Thetis? And what the hell am I doing here? I mean, I'm with all these other seamen and seaman apprentices. Most of these guys actually had real, legitimate seamanship skills. I mean, I did my practicals, and so on paper I knew what I was doing, but I didn't know a fucking thing. I didn't know anything about seamanship. It was the fucking worst. I mean, I could tie a few knots. I mean, that I was able to do. But you know, who couldn't? It's like this. Anyway, okay. So I'm standing amongst all these dudes, acting or looking like, well, I thought I looked like I knew what I was doing, but I'm sure everyone else saw right through it because they knew I had to be fucking lost. So in addition to these seamen and seaman apprentices, there were also 2 bosun's mate, a 3rd class bosun's mate, which is a 3rd class petty officer, and a 2nd class or bosun's mate 2, which is a 2nd class petty officer. And, you know, I never exactly knew why they called them petty officers. I mean, it had to have been some like derogatory term that let everyone know that they were inferior to real officers. According to the Oxford English Dictionary, it says the title derives from the Anglo-Norman and Middle French petite. Yeah, I'm not sure I'd ever classify any of them as being petite. I mean, it means of small size, small, oh, little. What? No, that's just the worst. The term petty officer actually never really sunk in as being, you know, a good name. I always hated it. And being called petty officer, blah, 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 blah. That had to really sucked. I mean, no one ever called me that. I mean, even when I became a petty officer, maybe when I got in trouble or something like that, or somebody who's mad at me, they would call me that. And that usually didn't go over very well. But anyway, who cares, right? In addition to the seamen and seaman apprentices and the bosun's mates, we also had Lieutenant Junior Grade, who was our department head. And when you're in charge of the deck department, that meant you were the first lieutenant, not like the first lieutenant from the movie with Harvey Keitel or the first lieutenant from Mutiny on the Bounty. And honestly, I forgot the original movie, but I know like the second movie, Mutiny on the Bounty, I think it was Mel Gibson actually. So anyway, yeah, go ahead, go look it up. Anyway, that was really bad. Yeah, I don't know what the hell I'm talking about. Anyway, so being the first lieutenant on a operational ship there's a lot of responsibility that you are in charge of, like all the deck operations or evolutions, as they were sometimes or mostly called. But on this ship, the Thetis, the first lieutenant was essentially a babysitter. I mean, we weren't going to be doing real seamanship shit for a while. I mean, the average seaman in the deck department was like 19 or 20 years old. And I mean, there were a few folks that were a little bit older. They were prior Army that ended up joining the Coast Guard. And honestly, I don't know why somebody in the Army would decide to join the Coast Guard. And I remember 2 of them in particular. They were a little overweight, really out of shape. I think they joined the Coast Guard when they still had what was called prior service boot camp, which essentially, as I said in season 1, there are folks that were in other military services, and then they joined the Coast Guard, and their boot camp at the time was essentially just going through specific Coast Guard shit and not the actual, you know, other rigors of boot camp, you know, which all the push-ups and the physical fitness, all that kind of crap. Because believe me, these fuckers would not have been able to pass a Coast Guard physical fitness test. Yeah, that was okay. Now I'm just going to go off on a tangent. But anyway, we also had a chief who wasn't there just yet. I think he was in transit to Key West or still on another assignment. But, we did have a chief that was going to be part of our group. He just wasn't with us at the time. So our BM2, the second class petty officer, he actually was coming from a small boat station. And if I recall correctly, had no big white one or, any cutter experience. So I think this was like a new thing for him. And we called him Mac all the time. I think I may have called him like BM2 most of the time, but maybe I did call him Mac. I don't remember. But he was a nice guy. So I will admit that there was one thing cool about him. He was a great guy. And I think he was just learning like the rest of us and trying to get along. And I think he was planning on, learning from the seamen that were already there. And again, like I said, quite a few of them had some skills, seamanship skills. But he was in for a rude awakening. And then we had the boatswain's mate third class or the third class petty officer. Holy fuck. This dude was a serious fucking disaster. He was really tall, 6'2" or more. I mean, easily. What made him a disaster? Okay, hold on to this. He was really lean, and all of his uniforms were outstanding. They were impeccable. So from an outward appearance, he looked like he had his shit squared away. I mean, at least his uniforms were squared away. He always wore these old, like, aviator glasses. So we always try to look like, a Navy dude with these, like I said, these naval aviator glasses. The Coast Guard really didn't have anything associated with them as aviator glasses. I mean, but these were like, Navy issue, I think. But anyway, I swear the guy thinks like he was walking at a Top Gun or something like that. And when he wore his ball cap, he had the bill pulled down so much that you could barely see his eyes. And the crazy thing was, though, here it is. He had zero fleet experience. Now, your average seaman apprentice or petty officer spends, 6 months to a year and a half in the fleet doing seamanship shit. Or if he was an engineer type, he would do an engineering shit. This guy, none, not a single one. Being a BM3 or boatswain's mate third class, his first duty station was the Coast Guard cutter Thetis, right out of boatswain's mate school. Before that, holy shit, the dude was in the U.S. Coast Guard Honor Guard, which is not to say it's not a cool gig, but he knew nothing about the real Coast Guard. I mean, the things like the Honor Guard does, way cool. I mean, it's like watching the U.S. Marine Corps Honor Guard. Everyone knows they're badass. And I imagine the Coast Guard Honor Guard's pretty badass too, as far as, Honor Guard stuff. But he didn't know shit. I mean, I don't think he even knew anything about, I knew no more about knot tying and seamanship shit than he did. And saying seamanship shit is really hard to say. But anyway, I'm not kidding you. I knew more than he did. That's sort of the basic, leaders of our organization. And I'll talk more about them a little bit later. But things sort of get weird and fuzzy at this point about the rest of my time in physically in Key West, Florida. It's okay, because it just seems like not too long after that, our chief arrived. And let me tell you, he was in stark contrast to all the other chiefs I knew or had met at that time. I mean, way different. How different? He wasn't the tallest guy, that's for sure. And he was kind of a medium to slim build. I don't even think he was like 5'5". And he looked older than most people at his rank would be. And at least the ones I had known thus far. Yes, I said thus far. I know this isn't Shakespeare, but come on, people. This podcast might be your only culture. Fucking savages. Anyway, he always liked to wear his combination cover, which was like a big old bus driver looking hat that we wore. He had a real veiny nose, and it appeared that he had liver spots on his hands and face. As it turns out, I think he had a problem with alcohol. At least that was the rumor. But he was really a nice guy, though. I mean, he was never rude to anybody. And if he got mad, I mean, you really, really, really fucked up if he got mad. Because he was always a good guy. And he was always really good to me. he was like I said, he was kind, and he made sure I knew my responsibilities. And by that, I mean, he gave me way more work than your average know-nothing seaman apprentice should. And you're wondering, why would he do that? Well, here it comes. Chief had once been stationed on Guam. And for those of you who don't know, it's an island in the Pacific near the Philippines. Guam also happens to be where I was born. My mom was Guamanian. That makes me part Guamanian. But of all the fucking people to reach out and recognize me as possibly being from Guam, it had to be this short, old-looking dude. I mean, people on Guam, like most small communities, they tend to love, hate, backstab, and just in general gossip amongst themselves. They tend to be pretty insanely loyal to their own people, even though they're busy, loving, hating, backstabbing, and gossiping about them. But that's typical sort of Guamanian island culture. Dude enjoyed his time so much on Guam that he met a Guamanian, married her, and had some little Guamanian kids. And every chance he got, he would bring up Guam when he was around me. It was sort of like I was his token Guamanian. And I don't mean that in the bad way, but anytime a conversation came up, he would bring it up. It was like he had gone full-blown Guamanian native or Chamorro. I mean, I think he thought I was raised with the same, cultural sort of things that they have on Guam. And I guess in general, I did. I mean, a little bit, because my mom was Guamanian, so I'm sure a little bit of it transferred being brought up by a Guamanian. But anyway, I don't know if he knowingly or consciously or subconsciously or whatever it was, but he ended up making me one of the 3 or 4 leading seamen, even though I wasn't actually a seaman yet. I was still a seaman apprentice. And, anyway, I didn't know any seamanship shit. So I was still baffled by all this. It was like a few weeks later or something like that. I mean, I don't remember. But I was on a plane for the 3rd time ever in my life. I was headed to Newport, Rhode Island. I don't know how or when it happened, but I eventually ended up in the barracks in Newport, Rhode Island. What I do remember is that it was on a fucking Navy base. I was like, crap. I really can't get away from these Navy people. It was just fucking nuts. I didn't join the Navy. I was in the fucking Coast Guard. Although, I will admit, living in the Navy barracks was way better than living on a ship. I mean, I basically was in a real bed. I mean, although it was like a cot of some sort. It basically was just it was like a futon, but it had a slightly better mattress. And it didn't have like the bar in the middle of the back that, always was there on a futon. But essentially, it was just a futon. And I thought also that I would have a real bathroom. Well, no, not the fuck at all. Now, don't get me wrong. It was a real bathroom. It had a toilet and sinks, but it was one of those big ass bathrooms that you had to share with like a gazillion other dudes. And these dudes still at this point were complete strangers to me. So sharing a bathroom with complete strangers was just, it was really fucking nuts. It was so weird. And despite what you think, me doing this podcast, I'm a bit of an introvert. So being around a bunch of strangers is difficult enough. Being around a bunch of strangers, sitting in my underwear or, taking a shower, being around these dudes was really hard to get used to. I mean, let's just face it, when you're in a public bathroom and you're a dude and you're in a urinal, dudes don't talk to each other. They don't look at each other. It's just like, get in, do your business and get the bleep out, right? Well, and I never, go poo-poo caca in a public bathroom. It's just something I don't do. But now I'm in a bathroom with a bunch of strangers and dudes are sitting on the can doing what dudes do on the can. And, it was really rough. And I mean, it was just as bad as boot camp, except in this case, I didn't break the toilet. So I guess this was a little better. Seeing all these strange faces and sharing a bathroom again, like at boot camp, it was just really uncomfortable. So pretty much like we did before when we were in Key West, we all got dressed up, in our uniforms, and we went and formed up outside. All the enlisted were there. None of the officers were there, though. And then, I mean, it's just like boot camp. We're kind of like the weird opposite side of boot camp. There was, waiting for us this gray school bus looking thing. I mean, it was basically a school bus, but it was painted gray. It wasn't a Greyhound, but it was a school bus. So anyway, at this point, I was just starting to learn who was who, but I was basically still lost like I was when I was first arriving in Key West, Florida. But thankfully, this would change pretty quickly. And oddly enough, it started with this crazy ass Navy bus driver that we had. Not that the bus driver was actually in the Navy. I mean, it was pretty clear by his demeanor. And also this ginormous boombox. If you don't know what a boombox is, go talk to your parents. He had this boombox bungee tied to the left of him as he drove. It pretty much screamed, "He is so not Navy." This dude was loud, but he was friendly. He's friendly. And he said hi to everyone. I don't remember a lot of what he would say to us, but he was always really encouraging. So that was cool. He was in a great mood, and he did the same thing every time the bus would take off. So when we left the barracks and when we left the shipyard where the Thetis was located, I'm guessing this is what the guy did. So just before the bus driver would take off, he would turn his boombox on. He would hit the play button, and it's like he had the same song queued up in the exact same spot. It was the song "The Wild Wild West" by Kool Moe Dee. So if you don't know the song, please look it up. I used to hear this song at least 2 times a day for like almost a month or so. I actually never learned any of the words because by the time the song was getting through or got any longer, the bus ride was over. Or maybe he just, had this one spot always like on loop. I don't know what he did. But every time, and I mean every time that we got on the bus and it took off, we heard the same song. I mean, it was pretty cool, actually. And so back in the day, I wasn't really a fan of hip hop or rap or anything like that. But the beat was cool. I mean, it was good. And on a weird way, it was the consistency of it. It was something that I was looking forward to. I knew this was going to happen. So oddly enough, it became just part of my normal day in the good old fucking Coast Guard. Again, for those of you who didn't catch it the first time, the song was called "The Wild Wild West" by Kool Moe Dee. Please do yourself a favor and check it the fuck out. So the bus ride was, I feel like it took us down this sort of mildly windy road. And by down, I mean actually down. If I recall correctly, and this was like a jillion years ago, the Navy base was like on top of a hill type thing or a cliff. So the bus was going down the hill, down this road. I mean, this was a long time ago, so my brain's a little fuzzy on those particular details. But what I do remember is that the closer we got to the ship, my anxiety level was going right the hell up. I mean, the shit was getting real, and it was getting real fast. And that sounded weird. I was actually having the same feeling that I got when the bus was pulling up to Coast Guard Training Center boot camp in Cape May. I don't know why. I mean, I wasn't going to get yelled at or anything like that. I mean, I didn't think I was. It felt like Groundhog Day. I'm showing up at another Coast Guard place, and I didn't know what the bleep I was doing. I was completely lost. I had no idea what I was doing. So yeah, I guess that's why I was getting the feeling it was like the same thing all over again. Groundhog Day. What I do also remember that this was the first time I saw the ship, and I had saw it from a distance. So sort of looking down on it. I don't remember exactly what I was thinking. Again, I was pretty anxious, and it was clearly not in a good way. I do remember too that I was thinking that I knew deep down I was going to get totally seasick. I mean, I just knew I was going to get seasick. And this from where we were looking down, everything was just looked dirty and grimy. I mean, it was a shipyard, and it sort of looked like something from those old Mad Max movies. The ones with Mel Gibson, not the ones with, what's the new guy's name? Tom Harding. But his movie was great. So, but I'm digressing. But yeah, but it looked like I had just, materialized in the Mad Max world. And the other thing is that the ship was, it seemed way bigger than the cutter Lipan, if you remember, it was back in Key West, Florida. But then again, things started to get just, again, real. And my memory gets a little foggy at this point because I don't know. It's just, there's like a whole gap in my memory. And a lot of it is, getting to this ship. But just like boot camp, when we got there, I didn't have much hair in my head, but with what hair I did have, because, I was still getting haircuts, it was like all standing on end. And I don't remember how close we got to the ship. Remember looking at it, that everything was dirty. And it was a shipyard. There was actually sand everywhere. And not because like there was a beach nearby, but there was just lots of sandblasting that they did to take paint off the ships, just whatever. I remember that the ship was like it was sort of whitish. And again, it was like there was dust everywhere. Coast Guard ships are normally white. There are a few that are not. They're but the buoy tenders, they're black. So those are like serious working boats. The Thetis was a 270-foot medium endurance cutter, and it was white-ish. Again, it was only whitish because of all the dirt that was around us. And there was some serious work going on around this place. Now, again, the Thetis was a 270-foot long medium endurance cutter that always sounded completely ridiculous to me. It's like selling yourself a little short a medium endurance cutter. It's as though the crew knew that they did not have high endurance, which may have been true because some of the people I met were definitely way out of shape. I mean, I'm surprised they had any endurance whatsoever. But I guess that only makes sense to me. So unless you're in the Coast Guard, and it won't make sense to you at all. But essentially, medium endurance cutters versus high endurance cutters are essentially, how long the ship could stay out to sea and stay on patrol and all that kind of cool stuff. So they had more longevity to go on missions. I think that's what it is. I mean, I suppose I should look that up. Well, so while it was not so important exactly where you got on the ship or you left the ship, although if you weren't boarding or embarking or disembarking via the quarterdeck, that meant you were usually into trouble or you were about to get into it. What was most important, though, is that there's a ritual, so to speak, when you do board a ship or when you're leaving a ship. Assuming the ship is flying or cutter is flying the U.S. flag. And honestly, I don't remember if we actually had the flag flying because at this point, Thetis was not commissioned yet or not in its pre-commissioning stage. But anyway, so I don't remember if the flag was, back aft or not. By back aft, I mean the back of the ship on a commissioned ship, the American flag is flying. And again, I'm just really trying to remember if we had it there, but it's not the point. When you were coming up to ship's brow or however mechanism you were getting onto the ship, when you got to the point before you step foot on the ship, if you were in uniform, you needed to turn, face back aft, face the flag, salute it. Then you're supposed to turn to face the quarterdeck, which is usually where the officer of the deck, or OOD, was located. And sometimes it wasn't even the officer of the deck. It was whoever was the watchstander at the quarterdeck, which was usually a petty officer of E2 or E4, at least on the Thetis. And so you would salute that person. They would acknowledge you came on board. And that was that. Essentially, the quarterdeck is the reception area on a Coast Guard ship. So essentially, these E4s and E5s petty officers, petty officer third class, petty officer second class, were essentially receptionists. It's yet another lovely job that I I didn't understand it. And I know that they needed someone there to greet people. And it was sort of like, also an information sort of hub. And ship's announcements were usually made via the quarterdeck as well. And that was a 4-hour watch to whoever actually had it. Now, I don't even remember at this point if the Thetis even had a quarterdeck. Honestly, I don't think it did. But essentially, it's just a reception area. So that I think they made us go through the drill to get used to it. But anyway, there was a couple of times though that and it'll be in later episodes, I promise, that I left the ship or boarded the ship not via the quarterdeck, and yes, I was doing stupid stuff. Anyway, so I don't remember if they actually made us do any saluting, but though I do remember hopping off the bus and trying to act like I totally knew what I was doing, but I was clueless. Just like I said, when I was in boot camp. The only difference is that this shit was real, and I was actually expected to know something. I didn't know anything. So I remember we all sort of walked up the gangway that led to the ship, and I think we came onto the flight deck. Maybe not. Maybe it was back at. Anyway, the flight deck was basically where a Coast Guard helicopter, or helo as we usually referred to it, would land and take off. The deck had this really weird coating on it, and the coating was there to help the helo stick to it, and also so it wouldn't slide around when it landed. And this stuff was sort of jagged, but so it was not something you really did not want to fall or be dragged across this stuff. It would totally ruin your day. But at the same time, it had like this weird sort of spongy feeling. But again, it was not fun at all. I mean, there were times later when I was in the Coast Guard and on another 270 that it would not be uncommon to see just a dozen or more coasties lying on the flight deck, trying to catch some Z's during lunchtime before afternoon quarters. But again, totally different story, and I'm sure at some point I'll talk about that. So I remember we all kind of meandered around, and we were waiting before for 8 a.m. to come when we all lined back up again. I think it was 8 a.m. I'm tired. I don't remember. But, it's morning muster. It was a staple every day of things that you did. So as we're lined up, I remember our department head, the first lieutenant, we'll call him Gleason again. I remember that he stood at attention in front of us, as we're all sort of lined up, and sort of he made his report to, take that back. So the bosun's mate second class made the report that everyone was present and accounted for to lieutenant, actually he's junior grade. So Mr. Gleason, who then reported to the XO. And so the department heads were lined up in front of the XO. And then the XO does this, about face, reports to the captain who's there, and something, but everybody's present accounted for. And then captain does this whole salute thingy, and we're all life is good. So everybody's there. But during all this mess, I mean, I'm looking around, the people around me, the boots. I mean, really, most of us were just boots, I mean, like right out of boot camp. I wasn't that long out of boot camp. I mean, it was less than a year, easily less than a year. So none of them knew jack squat. And how was it that I was going to be one of the leading seamen? Granted, I was senior to most of them just because I had been in a couple of months longer. But then there were more senior guys that honestly, they were such slackers. Nice guys, but they really they were kind of slackers. And maybe just because I was always quiet and kept to myself and I didn't come across as a slacker, I guess. But trust me, I'm a slacker. At least I was then. But anyway, so after morning muster, we all sort of gathered around and, meandered around a bit more. I remember, again, looking around and just like, this place is like mess. There's dust everywhere, paint splattered everywhere. I mean, it was like all over the fucking place. One of the things I never understood, though, is that the Coast Guard keeps their ships looking pretty pristine, generally speaking. But in the shipyards, the place is it's just a wreck.
You've been listening to Gonzo the Coast Guardiers Key West, written and produced by Tim Gonzalez, and I'm Nicholas Gonzalez, the voice guy. Join us next week for another episode of Gonzo the Coast Guardiers.